She had exactly $11, a baby sister 3 months shy of her first birthday, and no honest way left to feed either one of them. Nora Fairweather stood outside the land office in Larkhill with the advertisement clutched in her fist until the paper had gone soft from handling. Wanted, a wife of sound character and steady temper for rancher, Berlinness, no obstacle to a fair and honest home. She had read it 11 times on the walk from the boarding house, baby Ivy asleep against her shoulder the whole way, and she had made up her mind before she ever reached the door. "You understand what you're answering," the land agent said, not unkindly, when she asked him to write to Cassius Doyle on her behalf. "Man's been blind 3 years now, since the powder charge went wrong clearing his north field. Runs the place well enough, mind, better than most sighted men I know. But it's no small thing marrying a blind man, ma'am, with a baby besides." "It's no small thing being turned out of a boarding house with a baby and $11, either Nora said, and the agent, seeing something steady in her face that argued against further caution, wrote the letter. Her parents had died within a month of each other the winter before. Her father of a fever that swept through half the county, her mother of what the doctor called a broken heart, but Nora privately thought was simple exhaustion. Worn down by grief and work and a newborn who would not stop crying for the mother who had left her behind. Nora had been 22 and unmarried, with no kin closer than a second cousin in Ohio who had not answered her letters, and she had spent the months since taking in mending and washing until her hands cracked and bled. Watching her savings dwindle a nickel at a time while Ivy grew thinner than a baby ought to be, the boarding house keeper had given her 1 week's notice and no more. There had been no other offer on the table, honest or otherwise, and Nora had learned by then not to waste time mourning choices she did not truly have. Cassius Doyle met her wagon himself when it rolled into the ranch yard 3 weeks later, standing tall and unhurried by the porch rail, his sightless eyes turned toward the sound of the wheels with an accuracy that startled her. "Miss Fairweather," he said, before she'd even climbed down. "I hear a baby fussing. Bring her in out of the wind. There's a fire going and a cradle my mother used still sound." "You knew I had a baby with me before I said a word," Nora said, surprised despite herself. "I know a great many things without being told, Miss Fairweather. It's mostly all I've got left to know things with." There was no bitterness in it, only a dry, plain humor that put her more at ease than any polite reassurance could have. "I don't need pity in this house. I need a wife who'll tell me true when the fence needs mending and true when my shirt's buttoned crooked, and nothing more than that. Can you manage plain speaking?" "I can manage it better than most virtues I own," Nora said, and thought she saw, just at the corner of his mouth, the beginning of a smile. They married within the week, in a ceremony so brief and practical that Nora scarcely had time to feel the weight of it. A preacher from Larkhill, 2 ranch hands as witnesses, Ivy fussing softly in her arms through the whole of it. It was not the wedding she had dreamed of as a girl, back when her parents were living and the world had seemed a safer, gentler place. But Cassius Doyle spoke his vows steady and clear, found her hand without fumbling for it, and slid a gold band onto her finger with a gentleness that surprised her more than his certainty had. "I know this isn't the marriage either of us pictured," he said quietly, once the preacher had gone and the ranch hands had wandered back to their chores. "But I mean to be a fair husband to you, Nora, and a safe home for that child. That much I can promise, blind or not." "That's more than most men promise with both their eyes," Nora said, and found she meant it. The days that followed taught her more about Cassius Doyle than she had expected to learn in a month. He moved through his own house and yard with an ease that made strangers forget. Within an hour of meeting him, that he could not see at all, counting his steps between the porch and the well, reading the position of the sun by its warmth on his face, telling one horse from another by the particular rhythm of its breath before it had so much as nickered. He mended his own harness by feel, his fingering a fray in leather faster than her eyes could have spotted it, and when Ivy cried in the night it was often Cassius, not Nora, who rose first, guided unerringly to the cradle by the sound alone, humming some low tuneless thing until the baby settled. "You're better with her than I expected," Nora admitted one evening, watching him rock Ivy against his shoulder with the easy confidence of a man who had done it 100 times. though it had been only a fortnight. Babies don't need eyes to be loved proper, Cassius said. They need arms that hold steady and a voice that doesn't lie to them. I've got both of those in good working order. He tilted his head toward her, an odd, listening stillness in it. You sound surprised every time I manage something ordinary. Folks in Larkhill do the same. I've stopped minding it much, but I confess I'd hoped my own wife might see me a little clearer than the town does. I'm not surprised you manage, Nora said, stung a little by the fairness of the rebuke. I'm surprised how well. There's a difference, Cassius, and I mean it as the compliment it is. He was quiet a moment, and then his hand found hers in the dark of the porch, sure and warm. Then I'll take it as one, he said. It was a small thing, that hand-finding, but it happened again the next evening, and the one after that, until reaching for each other in the dark had become as unremarkable and necessary as breathing. Nora found herself watching him differently as the weeks passed. Not with the wary calculation of a woman managing a bargain, but with a growing, helpless fondness for the steadiness of him, the dry humor that surfaced at the oddest moments. The patient way he taught himself Ivy's every different cry until he could tell hunger from temper from simple loneliness before Nora herself had puzzled it out. You've a gift for her that I don't, she told him one night, half in wonder. I still can't always tell what she wants. You always can. I listen closer than most men bother to, Cassius said. It's the one advantage blindness has given me over a sighted husband, I suppose. I can't watch a room to see who needs me. I have to listen for it instead. Turns out that works well enough on a baby. Turns out, he added quieter, it works well enough on a wife too, if she'll let me listen long enough to learn her. Nora did not answer that directly, but she leaned her head against his shoulder on the porch swing that night, and he did not ask her to explain the silence, only accept it the way he accepted most things, with a patience she had never encountered in a man before, blind or otherwise. She began, in the weeks that followed, to teach him small things she thought might ease his days, though she quickly learned he needed far less easing than the town believed. She read him the newspaper each evening, and in turn he taught her to read weather in the wind's shift, to know by the particular smell of the air when a storm was building 2 days off. She learned to describe things to him the way he liked best, not painted with false brightness, but plain and true, the exact color of a sunset, the precise crookedness of a fence post that wanted mending, and he told her once that her voice, describing the world to him without pity or exaggeration, had become the thing he looked forward to most in any given day. You give me the truth of things, he said. Most folks either flatter what I can't see or fall silent altogether, like the world's too painful a subject to raise in front of a blind man. You've never once done either. You asked me for plain speaking the day I arrived, Nora reminded him. I don't know how to give you anything else now, good Cassius said. Don't ever learn. Not everyone in Larkhill shared his confidence. Cassius's cousin, a hard-eyed cattleman named Purcell Doyle who had coveted the rancher's water rights since the accident 3 years back, made no secret of his opinion that a blind man with a wife and infant was an invitation to trouble. A ranch needs a man who can see a rustler coming, or see a fire starting, or see a wolf in the herd before it's too late, Purcell said at the church social, loud enough for half the yard to hear it. You've married a fool's bargain, Mrs. Doyle, I should say. It's only a matter of time before that blindness costs you both. My husband has run this ranch 3 years blind and lost less stock to trouble than you have with 2 good eyes, Mr. Doyle, Nora said, her voice cool and clear enough that several heads turned. I'd thank you to keep your opinions of my marriage to yourself. Careful, Purcell. Old Mrs. Aldrich from the pie table, not troubling to lower her voice. That's a woman defending her husband proper. Best sort there is. Purcell's ears went red, and he muttered something about womenfolk not understanding ranch business before retreating toward the lemonade table, but the damage to his standing was already done. Half the churchyard had heard him mocking a neighbor's misfortune, and Larkhill did not forgive that kind of cruelty easily. Cassius, arriving in time to catch the tail of it, only smiled faintly and said nothing at all, though Nora felt his hand tighten briefly, gratefully around hers. You didn't need to defend me, he said quietly, once they'd walked a little apart from the crowd. I've weathered worse than Purcell's opinion these 3 years. I wasn't defending you, Nora said. I was defending the truth of things, same as you taught me to. It happened to be about you, that's all." He laughed at that, a real laugh, warm and surprised, and it was a sound Nora found she wanted to hear again and again. The trouble Purcell had predicted came 3 weeks later, on a moonless night in early November, though it came from Purcell's own direction rather than any wolf or wildfire. Nora woke first to the sound of cattle bawling in distress out past the north fence, and beneath it fainter, the low murmur of men's voices where no men ought to be at that hour. She shook Cassius awake, her heart hammering. "Rustlers," she whispered. "Cassius, I hear them at the herd, and I think it's Purcell's voice among them." Cassius was up and dressed before she'd finished speaking, moving through the dark bedroom with the same unhesitating certainty he moved through daylight, his rifle found and loaded by Feel alone. "Stay with Ivy," he said. "Bar the door behind me and don't open it to any voice but mine. You can't go out there alone, blind in the dark against armed men." "It's no darker for me tonight than any other night, Nora," he said, and there was something almost gentle in the correction. "I know this land by heart. I know every fence post and gopher hole between here and that north pasture better than a sighted man could learn it in a lifetime. Tonight the dark belongs to me same as it always has. Bar the door." She did as he asked, though every instinct in her screamed against it, and pressed her ear to the crack of the window, straining to hear anything at all above Ivy's frightened whimpering. The minutes stretched unbearably long, each one thick with every fear she had carried since the wedding day, every doubting word Purcell and the town had ever spoken finding new and terrible life in the darkness beyond the glass. What she heard over the next quarter hour was a story told entirely in sound, the creak of the gate Cassius knew by memory, the low murmur of his voice calling out into the dark with a calm authority that carried further than shouting would have. The scuffle and curse of men startled to find a blind rancher had somehow circled behind them in the pitch black, moving silent as a shadow across ground he had walked 10,000 times before. A shot rang out, wild and startled, and Nora's heart stopped entirely until she heard Cassius's voice again, steady, unhurt, the rustlers off his land in a tone that brooked no argument from men who had clearly expected an easy, sightless target and found instead a man who knew that darkness better than they ever would. By the time the ranch hands came running from the bunkhouse, rifles in hand, it was over. Purcell Doyle and 2 hired hands were found scattered and fleeing toward the county road, one nursing a bruised jaw where Cassius's fist had found him unerringly in the dark, the herd undisturbed but for a few heads scattered along the fence line. Nora met Cassius on the porch with Ivy on her hip and tears streaming freely down her face, unable to decide whether to embrace him or scold him for the fright he'd given her. "You could have been killed," she said, both at once. "Cassius, you could have been shot, out there alone." "I wasn't alone," he said, drawing her and the baby both into his arms, his heart still hammering hard enough that she could feel it against her cheek. "I had a wife and a daughter waiting on this porch for me, Nora. A man finds his way home quick enough when that's what's waiting for him." "Sighted or not, daughter," Nora repeated softly, the word catching in her throat. "You've never called her that before." "I've thought it a good while," Cassius admitted. "Same as I've thought a good many things about you I haven't said plain enough. I married you for a fair bargain, Nora Doyle, and I've come instead to love you with the whole of what's left of my sight, which I find, now that I study on it, was never really the seeing kind of sight that mattered most." She kissed him then, on the dark porch with Ivy fussing gently between them and the herd finally settling back into quiet across the moonlit pasture, and found that she had stopped, somewhere in the weeks since that first practical wedding, counting the bargain in dollars and safety at all. What she held now was simply a husband, sure-handed and steady-hearted, who had walked into the dark for her without a moment's hesitation and found his way home again by nothing but love. Purcell Doyle did not trouble the ranch again, his reputation in Larkhill ruined by a scandal no one much cared to defend once word spread of what he'd attempted against a blind cousin and a household with an infant in it. The sheriff paid him a call that cost him a fine and a good deal of standing at the mercantile, and within the year he had sold his own place and moved on to try his luck elsewhere, leaving the water rights and the whole of Larkhill's good opinion exactly where they belonged. Word of that moonless night travelled faster than either of them expected. And it was not long before neighbors who had once eyed Cassius's blindness with polite pity began speaking of him instead with a wary, admiring respect. The blind rancher of Larkhill who had run 3 armed men off his land in the pitch dark using nothing but his ears and the sure knowledge of ground he had walked 10,000 times over. Cassius bore the new reputation with the same dry humor he bore everything else, though Nora noticed he stood a little straighter when it was mentioned, a little more certain of his place in a town that had so long measured him only by what he lacked. Ivy took her first steps that spring across the porch boards, guided by her father's voice calling her name from a distance he had long since learned to measure without eyes, laughing with the particular delight of a child who trusted, absolutely, that the voice calling her would catch her if she fell. Nora watched them from the doorway, this steady man and the small girl who was not his blood but had become, in every way that mattered, entirely his own, and thought that she had come to Larkhill 3 seasons past with $11 and a desperate bargain, expecting nothing more than shelter and safety. She had found instead the truest fortune of her life, a husband who had never once needed his eyes to see her clearly, and a home built not on the bargain that had brought her to his door, but on a love neither of them had thought to look for, and both of them had been given anyway.